Hey there, welcome back to Coding at Home. Hey there, I'm Matt. Welcome back to Coding at Home with the Code Hub. Just gonna get my machine set up here so that we're on the right device. And we're ready to go. So today we're actually starting a brand new series. We're gonna play with the Sensor Arcade Playground. I love this playground because it shows off the iPad and all the sensors that you have access to. It's a real fun thing to program and to receive light updates and figure out what color the light update is, to figure out the brightness from the camera sensor. I think it's a great use of the iPad and really shows off some of the power of what coding can do. So we're gonna mess around with the Sensor Arcade for the next few sessions, and yeah, see how we get on. So with that, let's jump over to the iPad and we'll check it out. All right, so here we go. We're gonna start out today, as always, nearly in Swift Playgrounds. So we'll launch Swift Playgrounds. So we grabbed it yesterday, but we'll go through that again today. We're going to go to more playgrounds and see all. And we're going to grab Sensor Arcade is in the challenges section. So right here. As you can see, it's an intermediate playground. That's nothing to be that scared of. We've done intermediate playgrounds before with Lights Camera Code and Sonic Workshop, and for sure the Swan's Quest playgrounds. So we'll wait for that to download. And this is going to be working a lot with event handlers. And we're going to see this. We saw the introduction yesterday. We're going to go through it again today, just to get us all on the same page. But it's going to tell us a little bit about how we build these games. Because really what we're doing is we're going to be building games and game logic using some of these sensors on the iPad. So there we go. Now I have my playground downloaded. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. And we're going to start off with a little introduction about using device sensors. So we can tap through our items here. And it just tells us that inside many devices, like our iPads, there are sensors that can detect things in their environment. So an audio sensor, and in this case, that's going to be the iPad's microphone. It can detect noise. The screen, which is a huge thing, can detect every time our finger moves. We've been doing this a little bit with Sonic Workshop and to a lesser degree with Lights Camera Code. We've been recognizing touches on the screen and reacting to them. And then we have the light sensor. So the iPad's camera is going to notice when it gets dark or when it's light. So when a sensor detects a change, as you can read here, it sends a message called an event. So each of these events is going to send us a little bit of extra information. We saw this just recently with the Sonic Workshop playground, where we wrote an on-touch moved handler. And there was a parameter called touch, so we could actually get information about the touch from that touch that was passed down into our event handler. In this case, this example here, we have a handle light update function that gets passed a parameter called light. That's a type of color. And then we can do something with that color. So when we set our on update handler to our light sensor, it's going to pass in, when it does get called, when it notices that it has a change in the light it's sensing, it's going to send us a message called handle light update with a light as the parameter. So this code that we write and that we've written already is called an event handler. So this function here, where they check to see if that light that's being passed in is a color of green, or has a color of green greater than 0.5, it's going to rotate the giraffe by, or whatever that animal is, by 360 degrees over the course of 1 second. So that's the event handler, and we're going to be writing. That's going to be the most of the code that we're going to be writing over the next few days is stuff in our event handlers. We're going to have 2 modes for every page, a practice and a play. So this is where the game mechanics come into play. We're going to practice our and that'll run the code that we've written so we can make sure that it behaves the way we want it to, and then we can hand that game over to somebody else, or we can try playing it ourselves. So let's start coding. All right, so for our very first playground, our goal is edit the code so the player can catch all the cupcakes. So it tells us a little bit how touch works. So every time we touch and drag across the screen, it triggers an event. In the handle touch moved function, you can write code to do something when your touch moves across the screen. So here's an example. And like I said just earlier, we had a handle touch moved event handler in the Sonic Workshop playground. Now, you remember there were 2 ways to do it in the Sonic Workshop playground. You could either write a function and then pass that in as the on-touch handler, or you could use a closure. So in this case, we have a function written. And that's how we did it in the Lights Camera Code playground when we connected things like our shutter button or our front back button. We used functions rather than closures. There's no wrong way to do it. Well, there's plenty of wrong ways to do it. Neither of those ways, though, using a function or a closure is necessarily wrong. They're just different ways of doing the same work. So in this example, we have an apply impulse method on our player where we can apply an impulse in a certain direction. So with the X and Y coordinates. So like apply impulse, other methods the player can call are move to, move by, and duck. So, okay, so there are a few different methods that we can call when we're in our on-touch moved handler. The X direction constant finds the difference between the position of your touch and your player's position. Okay, that's this constant here, this let X direction equal the touch position X. So the X position of where I touch, so say if it's over here, it would be maybe 200 would be maybe our X position of the touch. And then the player position X, which might be over here. So then what it'll do is it'll have the player jump that difference between my finger and the location of the player in that direction and not change its Y position. So we have some code examples in the hints. Another way to tackle what happens in the function is to make the player move to the position of your touch. Okay, we'll look at that as well. So let's try out this code. So we have our function defined here. It's called handle touch moved. It takes a touch parameter that's of type touch. We have the difference in the X position. And then we say scene on touch set on touch moved handler. We pass in that function name. So that's a reference to this function here. And then we have this other property here called page difficulty, and we set it to .medium. So we can play around with that a little bit too. But let's run our code and see what this does. Okay, we've got a bit of sound. We'll turn it down just a little bit so we don't go deaf. All right, so this game is called Catching Cupcakes. So what we're going to do first is practice to see how this code actually runs. So let's go hit the practice button there. There's our guy. So we can see that cupcakes are going to appear in the air as they often do. And if we touch here, well, what do we think is happening here? So I'm just touching on the screen. So I'm touching, say, in the middle. And if I touch maybe here, okay, we're getting this player jump in an X direction, and it's not going any higher because we're not changing the Y position at all. So how would we solve this? Because we need to catch some of those cupcakes. Well, one thing we might want to do is we might want to change, instead of just using 0 for Y, we might want to do the same thing we did with X direction here. So let's try that. I'm going to tap behind that line for X direction. In fact, I'm going to make this bigger so I can see. I'm going to tap at the end of this line. I'm going to hit return down here. And we're going to create a new Y direction constant. So you create a constant by doing let. And we'll call it Y direction. And we'll use camel case with a lowercase starting letter, because I always try to start my variables and my constants with a lowercase letter, and then we follow it with a capital letter for the very next word. So our Y direction is going to be based on the touch Y position. So we'll do touch dot position dot, and we have a choice of X or Y. We're going to pick Y. And then we're going to subtract that from the player position Y. So in the autocomplete bar, we have a minus sign there. We'll hit minus. And we'll do player dot position. We'll scroll over and find position at the very end. Dot Y. All right, so we're not done yet. We've created the constant. Now we need to use it. So let's tap on Y direction in the autocomplete bar. Now let's hit run our code and see what happens. Okay, here we go. And you can see I didn't get back the question whether I wanted to play or practice. There's a button up here where I can switch the mode I'm in. All right, so now let's touch on the screen. I'm going to touch on the screen and say here. Okay, oh, that's more interesting. Okay, that's cool. This kind of works. This lets us catch cupcakes anyway. So that's good. Let's try changing this now to play mode and see if we can see what kind of score we can get with this. So I'm gonna hit the play button. Here we go. Okay. We've got 9, 10, 12. Okay, 14. Not bad. Not bad. We'll practice a little bit more though. We're going to close this out. All right, let's see. What else could we do though? So, all right, we're going to turn off the background music, tell you what. And actually, I'm going to go forward and then come back because I want to reset this page actually so we can take a look at the hints. Because maybe that's not the only way to do it. So it's gotten rid of my Y direction code and it changed the Y direction back to 0. So this isn't going to work great. I'm not going to get any cupcakes at this rate. So if I tap on the hint button, it gives us a hint saying call the move by method on the player instead of jump. We can move by the X direction, change the Y to 800, duration 0.5. Let's change that. Let's try that and see what happens. So I'm actually going to delete this line. Or actually, tell you what, we'll just tap on the jump and it'll highlight the whole function definition there. We're going to change it to move by. We'll scroll over. So we can do move to point or we can do move by. So we'll do move by. X is going to be the X direction. Y, in this example here, they've got hard coded to 800, so we'll do that. And then the duration will be 0.5. So let's run our code and see how that works. With the play button. Oh, have you lost me? I think you've lost me. Hold on. Let's make sure you're updating. Would help if Air Server didn't crash. And that's why we went all funny. All right, here we go. Now we're back. All right. So all you missed was me tapping in this player move by function, and I grabbed the hints here. So I went to the hint button, and this gave an example of using the move by method. So let's practice this. Let's see what this code actually does. We're running already because we can see the stop button there. So if I tap on the screen, okay, not too bad. It only ever goes up 800 on the y-axis, which I don't know if that's going to get me all the cupcakes that I need. But that's interesting. That might be an interesting game to hand over to somebody to have them play. There, we'll get rid of our little live playing button there on Air Server. Oops. Sorry, we're struggling a little today with our screen mirroring. Here, we'll give that another shot. Okay, all right. Very exciting today. We'll be back in 1 second with our live screen. All right, there we go. Now we're back live. Now you can see us. You can see our hint button down here. We're looking much better. So if you can see, as I tap around, I don't get much higher than, and I always go to the same level. Well, there we go. Now we can get to 8 higher than midway up the screen if we tap before our little creatures landed. That might make an interesting game, a different way to score points. Let's check out some other options. So that's the move by method. This is the method that we picked first. We created a new y direction variable to use in our jump method. Or we can use it in any method that takes an x and y value. This is more interesting instead of hard coding 800 because now we react to where the player's finger is anywhere on the screen, not just the x-axis. We also take into account the y-axis. And then this is another interesting one here. I would almost call this the cheat code. So what you could do is you could move the player to where you touch on the screen. So if I touch here on the screen, that's where we're going to change that player's position to. So let's try that. We'll leave our x direction defined in there. We'll actually delete our player move by. And we'll just do exactly what we have here. So player dot position. There's position. We're going to set it equal to the touch position. All right, let's run our code and see what we have. We'll move the hint. Oh, that's way better. I think we'll get a much higher score this way. So wherever I tap on the screen, that's where my little creature goes. So let's try playing that and see if we can beat our 14 high score. There we go. Just jumping right to my finger position. That's so much easier than having to try to guess where it's going to go. Okay, we got 20. Did you beat me? We'll find out. I'll find out from the guys anyway when I go downstairs in a second. I'll find out from you if you email me at live@thecodehub.ie. So, okay. All right. So we got a high score of 20. Not bad. We'll take a screenshot so that we can compare and contrast and see who got the highest score at our Catching Cupcakes challenge. So now we're going to go on to the next page, but this is an interesting challenge because now we can kind of figure out what might make a better game. Do you think that makes a better game where we get very high score and we just tap on cupcakes? Or do you think the other game where we had a bit more guesswork to do, a bit more work to figure out, well, how do I get this creature to go and intersect with the cupcakes? That might make for a better game. So it's a good thing to play around with and pass around and see what your friends think. We can also do extra math instead of just doing the difference between the X position of the player and the X position of the touch. Maybe we just use the touch position to have it move by that much. So it's something to play around with and maybe do a little bit of math with the X and Y coordinates to see if you can't make it a really, really entertaining, engaging game. All right, so the next page, we're going to play around with light control a bit. Or actually, before we do that, let's stick on this page for a second. What I want to do is I actually want to try, let's see what we can do in terms of difficulty. So I just deleted all that medium code before the period, and I left the period. And we can see that we have a couple options here. We have less challenge, medium, or more challenge. Well, let's try out less challenge first. We'll hit run. And I'll hit the X button, and I can pick player practice. Well, let's practice and see how bad it is with less challenge mode. Okay, so we got one cupcake. And another one. So obviously for a less challenge mode, it just generates cupcakes a little bit less frequently. So it's maybe a little bit easier to catch them. Let's try more challenge. Let's delete that. I'm just hitting the delete key down here in the toolbar. And we'll change it to more challenge and see what happens. Let's run our code. Oh wow, this is way harder. I don't think I've gotten a single cupcake yet. Let's play it and find out. Okay, we've gotten a few. This is definitely harder, moving faster. Now that our little cheat code isn't too bad because it jumps right to the spot of the cupcake. So maybe that's a little bit better, and I'd score higher with that mode than trying the other mode. Now you could do something similar. You could also say, hey, if you want to do more challenge, maybe you decide what handle touch moved function you're going to use. You could actually write two different functions. So you could say, okay, well, this is our sort of cheat function. So we'll actually call this one here. I'm going to press on the space bar and move the cursor just to the end of moved. And we'll call this one position change. Now, there's an error right now because there's no such function called handle touch moved anymore. I'm going to create another function here. So I'm going to tap on the func keyword. And I'm going to call this handle. Ooh, I'd hope if I spelled it right. Handle touch moved. And we'll call this one move by. Or maybe, actually, you know what? There was that apply impulse. Let's use that one. So we're going to do the same thing we have here, actually. We're going to use this X direction. We'll also create a constant for our Y direction, and we'll apply an impulse in that direction. So let's do it. So we'll do let X direction. And the reason why we have to redefine it here is because we don't have access to that one, this X direction constant, because that's inside this function. It's only valid inside this function. So we're going to get the difference between our touch position X and our player position X. We'll type in player dot or touch dot position dot X. We're going to subtract the player position X. So that's our X direction. Let's do the same thing and create a Y direction. So we'll do the same thing. We'll grab let Y direction. And we'll set that equal to touch dot Y. Oops, not touch dot Y, touch dot position. Dot Y. And we'll do minus player position Y. Player dot position dot Y. Okay, so now that we have our X and our Y value, let's apply an impulse. Now, if we look at the very top of the instructions here, the apply impulse method takes an X and Y coordinate. So let's go do that. So we'll do player. We'll start typing in player dot apply. So here's apply impulse. There's also an apply force method that you could call. So let's use X direction for X and Y direction for Y. And let's see what that does. So we're going to hit run my code. But we're going to have a little problem. So it says down here, it says use of unresolved identifier handle touch moved. Okay, well, I have two new functions. One called handle touch moved position change, and then one called handle touch moved apply impulse. So let's try using handle touch moved apply impulse. Now, interesting, why am I not getting this as an autocomplete? What's the difference between those two functions, huh? Let's go take a look. So here, and we'll open this up so we can see it better. So the top function says handle touch move position change, and it's got a touch parameter. And now we don't actually need that. We could actually get rid of this line. And in fact, let's do that. Let's get rid of this. So we'll delete that. I'm going to hit delete because I only have one line of code in this particular function. Now, if I look here, let's tap on these red dots and see what they're complaining about. In this case, we got an unresolved identifier touch because we're not passing in a touch parameter yet. So let's do that. Maybe that's why it wasn't showing up in our autocomplete. So let's drag out a parameter. We're going to call it touch, and we'll make it of type touch. Actually, it's giving me that down in the autocomplete bar, so let's do that. So now in here, we're going to set the on touch move handler. Now I do have the two options. I have the apply impulse and position change. So let's tap on the first one. And let's try running our code now. So hit run my code. All right, it says catching cupcakes, let's catch at least 10. Okay, so let's practice. Okay, so that's what apply impulse does. So I can tap all around this box and get some pretty crazy behavior. Let's try playing it and see what our score might be using the apply impulse one. Okay, this is a little bit of our position changed one. So 12, not great, not as good as 20. How did you make out that code? So what we could do is we could actually change our page difficulty and write some code here so a person could pick whether or not they wanted to use the apply impulse handle touch moved function or the handle touch moved position change. And we could do the handle touch move position change if someone wanted to have an easier game. And then the apply impulse one could be used if they wanted a bit more of a challenge and they wanted to try to figure out how those impulses were going to be applied and how they get their character to move across those cupcakes. So try it. Try writing a few other functions and seeing if you can swap them out and compare how well you do and see if you can beat that high score. See if you can beat 20, my high score. And if you do, feel free to post it wherever you like to post things. I'd love it if you tagged it with hashtag coding at home. And we're going to come back tomorrow. And tomorrow we're going to be working with Dashing Donuts, my personal favorite, because it involves donuts. I hope you had fun today. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow.